So today I'm going to be telling you about how consciousness actually works. So there are a few fundamental parts, like it must be a network of individually processing pieces. Communication must be seamless between the pieces. The network must not mindlessly follow programs generated by an outsider or a central body, with the exception of the laws of physics. And each piece of this network must have at least some control over what it is doing. And it also must be capable of pattern recognition. So, alive and conscious don't necessarily mean the same thing. So, also note that intelligence is hard to quantify. And there is a positive correlation, but they don't always match up. And consciousness is an emergent property, but it also has to be conserved because it is directly linked to some sort of quantum field. Well, most things are, but consciousness is directly linked to chemical reactions and the movement of charged ions in your brain, all of which must be conserved in some way. And conscious connections can sort of be broken, but the consciousness cannot be destroyed. I made a mistake when writing, but yeah. So another important thing is that consciousnesses can split and move around. They can function as both discrete and continuous, much like the electromagnetic field. Like light particles can act as both waves and particles. And consciousness can not be defined as one contiguous thing. Your brain cannot be defined as one contiguous thing, which has been proven by neuroscientists. Like, they cut somebody's brain in half, and the two parts function differently. And no one really knows what happens when you die, but it's likely that what happens is that basically your consciousness will slowly fall apart. Not disappear, but it will fall apart and fall into random things and sort of just flow around the place and sort of echo. Also, it's important to note that there's no limit to the number of experiences a conscious receiving body can have. For example, you might be like, it's incomprehensible to be able to see out of your head. But if somebody added an eye to that would be, you would still be able to see out of it. It might be weird, you'd have to adjust to it, but you would be able to. A good analogy of this is that if you were suddenly able to see ultraviolet light like a bee, it would be super confusing and you would have no way of understanding what was happening, but you would still be able to see it. The only reason you can't comprehend it and understand it is because you haven't seen it before. There have been tribes uncontacted tribes that aren't used to seeing certain colors, and when they see those colors, they are confused and don't have a way of comprehending them or have a word to represent them, but they can still see it. So that's pretty cool. So now I have a thought experiment for you that might feel a little bit illegal. Try and just forget about everything except your head and think about yourself as a floating head for a few minutes. And then when you're done with that, try and reimagine yourself as one contiguous body afterwards. The weird thing is that it gets harder the more you imagine yourself as a floating head. So my theory is that it's harder to imagine yourself as part of a bigger consciousness because you are so used to thinking of yourself as just you. And then I have another weird question. If your brain gets cut in half and your consciousness is split in two, what does that feel like? Because your consciousness can't just disappear. But what actually happens is you get split, so to speak, and it doesn't matter which one you end up in, you'll just end up in a random one. But it's more likely to be the one with more of the processing power, which can also depend on whether you're right or left-handed, which is weird. I understand if you are confused. A good analogy for this is quantum entanglement. When a photon, or just as just an example, when a photon splits into an electron and a positron, there's no telling which way the electron will go and the positron will go. There's no preferential way of telling. Like, there's literally no way of telling. It's just random every time. Which means that, assuming that both sides of your brain are exactly the same, which is not true, you would end up in a random side of the brain if your brain gets cut in half. But it's weird because there's different sides of your brain are different. Some people have one side of their brain that contains the speech and the other side that contains the writing and other stuff. If you want more information on this, Google the split brain experiment, because it's really fascinating and it kind of made neuroscientists freak out. They're like, wait, what the just happened? Because it was weird and nobody had understood how the consciousness really worked before, but after that experiment, they have a better understanding of it. They did have to cut somebody's brain in half for it, but at least the person was still alive. At least they are doing okay, and I'm pretty sure they adapted to it. In fact, people with multiple personality disorder know what it's like to have multiple consciousnesses in their brain and know what it's like to have power sort of overthrown and they're not able to control themselves anymore. And the notion that your brain is one contiguous thing and one consciousness is an illusion that 3.8 billion years of evolution have made it beneficial to believe and fall for. If you want to be able to have new experiences that you maybe weren't be able to comprehend before, you have to look past the 3.8 billion years of evolutionary conditioning, not to go against nature, but instead just to be able to diversify your skill set, so to speak.